probably should.
Maybe, Mr. President.
Alright, hello everyone and welcome back. There's definitely more people than there were last week because there's like just everyone in the lab walked up here because we forgot to announce the meeting. If you're new, I see some new faces, not a whole lot. Join our Slack if you haven't already. It's cyberuc.slack.com. That's where all of our messages happen. If you have a UC email, you should be able to join. If you don't, just see one of us after the meeting and we can invite you. What else is in there? We have information about our lab and our other events that we do are all posted in there. We very rarely do anything outside of that. And then if you are new and you want to get more involved, we have 5 now. CTF should be up there. 6. We have, that's not 6. It is 6.
We have 7.
We have 7 now. Okay. We have 7 subgroups in our club, which is content, finance, public affairs, outreach, recruitment, and lab. If you are in charge of one of those, go ahead and raise your hand.
I'm in charge.
All right. So there's plenty of people here who you can talk to. Just hunt them down later.
In fact, if anyone doesn't have a class tomorrow at 5, me and him are going around campus and putting up posters, so if you want to help,
Awesome.
show up at 5 at the
Should we
lab.
announce the outdated posters? And
Oh yeah, and we do have out-of-date posters out and about. If you see a red Cyber UC poster and it says the meeting's on Tuesday, just go ahead and tear it down because they're always on Wednesday now. And then other announcements, Zardis. Does anyone not know who Zardis is? All right, so Zardis is this brilliant researcher in the field of cyber, and he competed at the Cyber Grand Challenge at DEF CON 24 a couple years ago.
yeah, it was 25.
With the Shellfish team, which he's the captain of, and then he was also one of the creators of the Overflow team, which now hosts the DEF CON CTF. And going back to CGC, Cyber Grand Challenge, which was like a huge AI project to create an AI platform that would play CTFs for you. This guy is like super smart, and if you've ever done anything with anger, that's something he's been a part of. We have his. This is his website.
It's right here, Jake.
His real name's Jan. Just go straight to his GitHub. Oh, too far. Yeah, so he was one of the creators of Order of. Oh my god, you guys can't see that. Order of the Overflow, and he was the captain of Shellfish, which are like 2 of the biggest names in CTF right now. So if you ever go to DEF CON at all, you will hear one of these groups.
Isn't Shellfish a tool as well?
No?
I think there's a Cali tool that's
Maybe.
like fishing with Instagram or something weird.
Okay. But if you've ever heard of Anger, that's also from him through the CGC Mechanical Fish, or Mecha Fish. So he's done all kinds of things, and he's actually coming to our meeting February 5th, so do not miss that. Bring it back. Slides. Hello. There. And then also Revolution UC is happening on the 22nd of February, so 2/22/2020. Lots of 2s in that number. Signups are on their website. You can't do it through us, and we are hosting another CTF event this year. So if you're interested in doing that, either go or come to our lab meetings, or no, our CTF meetings on Saturdays, and then help us plan it. So that's that. Cliff, do you want to take news?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Is that the 22nd and the 23rd, like that overnight there?
Yeah, it's a 24-hour event.
Is it okay?
Yep.
They give out really good prizes.
So not a whole lot of news this week. The one that I chose to actually cover is there was a Windows Explorer vulnerability found in versions 9 through 11. That doesn't affect most modern versions that are running, but pretty much everything on Windows 7, if it was kept up to date, is kind of impacted. So those machines won't be getting patched ever because Windows 7 is end of life now. So that vulnerability is one of the first ones that's going to remain unpatched for all Windows 7 hosts. Yay! It's very detectable, luckily, so even in organizations where they do choose to use Windows 7 in the next 10 years, they will be able to detect it with at least a little bit of network monitoring. But yeah, it's there, and it's being actively exploited with no patch out yet, and it has been for a little while. Then there was one other thing. I didn't make a slide for it because it's really dense, but I believe the UN released a press release today, and they were investigating Jeff Bezos's phone being hacked. That's kind of neat, but it was very targeted, and the text that he received, or the message he received that actually caused the infection, was sent by the Saudi Crown Prince, which is like a really high profile way to infect someone. Just crazy targeted. And I'm not going to go too much into that because details are still coming out, but yeah, that's about it.
Did they like spoof his number, or did they actually find out that it was from him?
They actually found out it was from him.
It's so weird.
So is it intentional though?
It was intentional, whether it definitely.
Oh no, I accidentally hacked your phone.
Like,
Came from him and he was part of it.
that's still kind of up in the air. But
He literally just sent Jeff Bezos a file.
I heard it was.
It was like a phishing link or something.
it was a video.
Yeah, I heard it was.
Infected WhatsApp.
Jeff Bezos uses WhatsApp?
So was it an iPhone or was it an Android? That he had?
I assume Android.
I know. I bet he uses a Fire phone.
Only $79.
My phone was just way too ahead of its time. It had like 4 cameras just on the front.
The Fire phone.
The Fire phone?
What?
A lot of cameras.
They one up like face tracking before anything.
You need 20 cameras on your phone. Any less, and it's fake.
Literally move that
Fake
phone.
news.
Any less and we can't track you efficiently.
Excuse me, what?
That's 3 cameras.
No, that's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
There's some on the bottom too.
There's like 1 on the back.
You really gotta scan that face, especially when you're shopping Amazon.
Yeah.
If there's 5 cameras, it means 5-dimensional selfies, right?
Absolutely.
Something like that.
Alright. So tonight we're going to be doing SQL injection. Has anyone here not seen SQL ever before? Or not know what it is? It's okay. Don't be shy. I don't do web dev stuff either, so I never mess with SQL. So for those who don't know, the OWASP top 10 is basically a list that comes out every like 4 or 5 years. It's due for an update, so actually if there's an update this semester, we'll probably change it up. If anything really changes on there. Injection, which we're covering tonight, is basically always number 1. It's the biggest vulnerability. Here's the list right here. So tonight we're going to cover injection and then probably just walk through the rest of these. Probably jam some of them together into one meeting. But this is what it is. Basically, OWASP, which is Open Web App Security Project. Yes. They put out this list and basically provide methods of avoiding it. So today is injection. All right, so what is injection? Straight from OWASP website, it's when untrusted data is sent to an interpreter as part of a command or query. Basically, it tricks the interpreter into executing unintended commands. We'll go over that in a little bit. But it basically allows people to access data without proper authorization, and it really can come from a lot of sources, but mostly it's environmental variables or a lot of the times text fields. So like login pages is a really big one. Tonight we're focusing primarily on SQL, just because that's what I felt comfortable with and I thought would make sense to a lot of people, but NoSQL is another thing that I knew what was at some point in time. It's a different type of SQL.
It's basically a different type of SQL. It
Yeah.
depends on what you're doing. But
No, it's like unordered data, basically.
Yeah.
I think NoSQL is just a category of any sort of system
Yeah.
that isn't SQL. Just a big
it's not an
Different types
ORM,
of
but it's not SQL.
Yeah. LDAP is also vulnerable to it. That's like Windows
Lightweight
directory
Directory?
access.
access protocol.
Yes. So yeah. Also, I hope you appreciate the memes along the way. Did you delete the pumpkin one? There it is. It's a good one. Chris put that in there. So Y injection, basically it lets people bypass authorization, so that's a pretty big one. Tonight we'll actually have a website that you guys can get admin on. Retrieve data, so a lot of times people can just be like, select all from this database, and everything comes out. And then you can also insert or change data, which I thought this was a really good example of.
Is that an XKCD comment?
I think so.
It is.
I just Googled SQL memes, or SQL injection memes, and this is what came up.
It's an old XKCD comic.
Yeah. But, so yeah, those are like the three main reasons people perform injection. So there's different types of SQL injection: in-band, blind, and out-of-band. The most common is in-band, where basically you have the same channel of communication. So if you're directly interfacing with like a web app or something, you can see like, okay, I put this data in and this data comes back. Pretty straightforward. The two different types of that are error-based and union-based, which we'll get into shortly. Blind injection is basically data doesn't come back. So there's probably some form of protection or something not allowing stuff to come back. So one of the biggest ways to mitigate SQL injection is just to not return anything to the user. So like, you don't tell them, hey, something bad happened on our side. You just like drop like something bad. I don't know. When we do Juice Shop, you'll see there's a little bit of it. They just say like object, object. So there's two types of that: time-based and Boolean-based, which it'll make more sense when we get into it why it's called blind. Out of band is really uncommon, but it's still a category. Basically, there's a different communication channel. So when you put something into, let's say, a web app, nothing really comes back. So one of the most common ways to do it is have another server out on the internet that's compromised. So you'll use, there's like two ways that I saw you can do it, where you can make like DNS requests or HTTP requests out to your infected server from that web server, so you like make a jump, but that's really uncommon. In-band and blind are the two most common. So this is just kind of the basics of how people perform injection. You kind of can't really see that, but basically this is Hack the Box's website. No, I did not perform injection on their website. I don't know if you can. I'll try. Can you like try it, or is it just immediately illegal?
You can try it on Hack the Box, because it says hack this to get into the system.
That's true. Yeah. For those who don't know, Hack the Box is a really fun website. We started playing with it in CTF meetings. Basically, it made me feel really dumb, but people will host VMs and they give you just an IP, and you have to hack in and get user and root on a box. So really hard, but really fun. Come to CTF meetings for that. But this is their website. They ask for an email and a password. So I don't know on their website what they run, but some web apps have PHP on the back end, where basically they have a string that you just concatenate with email and password. So select all from, let's say you have a table credentials where you have your email and let's say a password. But basically you're just sticking everything together and generating this query. So in normal cases, let's say we put in like test@gmail and then like the password was test or something. You would get this really nice query where select all from credentials, and hopefully that would return your profile. Where injection cases, you can see here, kind of maybe dim the lights. All I put was an apostrophe, drop table credentials, semicolon, hyphen, hyphen. That probably looks really ugly, but what that does when it concatenates all the strings together and sends that off to the SQL server, it malforms the string. So you basically drop that apostrophe, colon, drop tables, kind of highlights. I did syntax highlighting, so it makes a little bit more sense. But you basically close off this quote, and then this semicolon ends the command. And then immediately after that, you drop table credentials. So it's pretty bad. If this were to actually happen, and they didn't have backups, basically all their user data is gone. So that's really the basics of it. So we'll get into like the different types of it. Did anyone have any questions on that? Good, cool. So first up is error-based. I like that, it's a good one. If you can't read that, it says it all starts with an apostrophe. We'll talk about that in a minute. But basically error-based relies on error messages being returned by a SQL server. Like I said earlier, one way to mitigate that, don't return error messages. So 2 examples of this. So for those who don't know how PHP works, after this question mark, you're basically sending variables. So in this case, it would be ID is equal to 1 order by 1 minus n. In this case, it would just be like 1. So what you can do here is when this gets sent off, if you keep incrementing this 1, it will basically return the number of columns. And if you go over the number of columns, like say you have 4 columns in your table and you go to 5, it'll trigger an error. And then that way you know, hey, there's only 4 columns in this table. So you'll know, like, okay, when I return data, I can only format it in 4 columns. We might get into that a little bit more, but this really long command, I don't know what it really does either, like just looking at it, but what this can do is return the version of SQL Server that they're running. If someone's really good at SQL, they might be able to explain what's going on, but I think they're getting stuff from information schema, which is a database or table? Database.
It's a database inside of your server that has meta information. I think that's very specific to MySQL though.
Yeah.
It's like if you give information schema that version, or I guess they have to add version there, it'll tell you what version of MySQL you have installed on the server.
Gotcha. I think next one somewhere in here. There's another really good example of error-based in here somewhere. But quickest way to tell if something's vulnerable to SQL injection is just an apostrophe. So a little meme earlier with the kid getting a shot, like that's what this is. So when you inject this little apostrophe, it malforms the string. So you have an apostrophe and then another apostrophe and you start another one. So you send that off to the SQL server and it says, no, I don't like that, and it breaks. So that's a really quick way to tell. Next is union-based. This one's really interesting. Yeah, this is where the example is. So it basically abuses the union operator to combine multiple select statements. So say earlier we saw like select all from users. Well, if you put a semicolon, or not a semicolon, if you union that with another select statement, as long as they have the same number of columns, it basically just like staples the tables together and returns all of that. So that one's really powerful. You basically just get to write whatever queries you want after that and just have like free range at SQL Server. Just a couple notes on union. Like I said, same number of columns, similar data types. So if you have your columns line up and you've got like ints in this column and then the next one has strings, it's going to throw an error. So you got to be careful with that. Columns in each select statement. So it's in order. Okay. This was a really good example. So this one, he finds table names. We'll just breeze through this. How did he do this? Oh, yes. So this is how he can kind of find out which SQL server they're running. So under the hood, your database will have different databases inside of it. So I think SQL, or it's your DBMS, Database Management System.
We call it the server.
Server?
Yeah.
So inside your server, you'll have different tables, and if you can get it to trigger the an error, basically try to select a table that doesn't exist, it'll throw an error. This is what I was saying by the number of columns. So basically you can increment this number until something bad happens. Data types as well. I'm not gonna go through every single one of these, but that's really it. Does anyone have any questions about that? I kind of just breezed over that. No? Good. Cool. Okay, this is kind of fun. So this is blind SQL. Basically, it uses a sleep function. So if you're not getting anything back, if N-band's not working, you can't see anything, but you think it's vulnerable to SQL injection, you can inject a query that basically will cause the server to execute a sleep function. So if you're stable, or if your connection is stable enough with the server and you get it to sleep for 3 seconds or 5 seconds or however long you need, and you like click log in and it waits for that long, then you know there's SQL code getting executed on the back end. So that's one way you can tell, and then you can kind of go from there. Excuse me. Boolean as well, it's pretty much along the same lines. So if you can get some sort of condition, then obviously SQL code is being executed. This is a good little meme, because if you can't read that, it's apostrophe or 1 equals 1 colon hyphen hyphen. It's like one of the most common SQL injections.
Yeah, so you can add the or to the end of a username equals user and password equals password, or 1 equals 1, so that you can arbitrarily select users out of certain programs like that, and then just log into them without their password. That's probably the most famous SQL injection.
Hello.
It's happening over here too, so it might be here.
Okay. So this is out of band. This diagram is a little bit better of a representation of it. Basically relies on your server to make DNS or HTTP requests to deliver data to another server. So what I found online is Microsoft SQL has an xp-dir tree command, which can make DNS requests for you. And then Oracle's database also has util HTTP package. I have no idea what any of these are, but
utility HTTP. It's probably just a socket.
But if you look up out of band, it's like these two, and then that's really it. But basically, that can send HTTP requests to another server. So that's basically it. You just send an injection and then whoop, send something else to another server.
The older versions of Microsoft SQL Server also had a SQL command that would just run any command on the host system. So you used to be able to actually make it open arbitrary programs and then do things on those, as well as you could drive them through the command line.
I think one of those is in here. Oh no. So second order injection. So even if you sanitize your input on the way in, it can still have SQL inside of it. So this actually was an attempt by Andrew, was it?
Yeah.
To have a second order injection where basically your username or password or whatever gets used somewhere else, and that gets stuck in a query and then causes some problems. So he tried to make his username team drop table team names, which we were using an ORM, so we're good, because that's one of the mitigations actually. So injection prevention, Ethan, defense. There you go. Use safe APIs, so anything to avoid the interpreter. Don't really know what that means. It was kind of straightforward. I couldn't find any examples of that. But
so the most notable example for that is PHP. You can just put raw SQL statements right in it. It has a very nice MySQL interface, as well as several other servers. It used to be very, very common for people just to put a whole query on their PHP code side, and then just copy and paste their variables into it. There are now methods called like prepare statement that you put your string, you put your whole query as the first parameter, and then your parameters that you're adding it to as more arguments, and then it will make sure that it's not actually injecting symbols into your code that be executed. So things like quotation marks will be marked as not part of the string.
I think that's in here at one point. I think
That's
later on.
probably exactly what that means.
So use RMs or object relational mapping tools. So we actually use this in RangeMaster, and it's really, really nice. So Python has this beautiful package called SQL Alchemy that basically just allows you to have objects serialized and shoved into a database.
Yeah.
So here we've got like a server ID or whatever entered, like 1 or 2, 3 or 4. So basically we return silo machine object and filter it based on the ID that we enter. And since it's formatted this way, you can't really be vulnerable to injection. Proper input validation on the server side. So again, escaping quotes, really any special characters. Limit is a good one for avoiding mass data disclosure. So you can actually limit the number of entries that get returned on commands. So like, you only want to return 1. Someone can't get like thousands. And also, like Chris said, the exec command, avoid that entirely, because that just executes actual commands and will start other programs and stuff. So also, like Chris said, parameterization.
It's a hard word.
It is a big word. So these are just a couple examples for each language. So like Java, .NET, PHP, Hibernate, and SQLite. These let you use bind variables, or basically, there's more examples, but you can put like little question marks in there, and then you can just put a list of variables after that, and it takes care of everything for you. So that's also an option. Okay, it says test time. I'm not going to test you guys. Can't remember where I was going with this. Thank you. Do you guys think this is vulnerable? Why?
Don't ask me. I already know.
Does anyone else know? I honestly forget, but
It would be vulnerable because you're just immediately putting the query into the database and then taking that result back. You're not processing what the user actually queried.
gotcha. So yeah, he's right. Basically, you're taking this parameter customer name and not really doing anything to it. You're just like smushing it on the end of that query and then just sending it right off to the server. So bad. What about this one?
I think it's safe.
I think it's safe too. I don't know why I didn't put answers in here.
I think the comment helped me out though, that second comment.
Yeah, I think all of them had that actually, and to get it to fit all on one screen, I took them out. But yeah, I think this one is safe, just because, yeah.
You're looking at the first line?
So the first one, and
Oh, but then it,
The third line is the first.
I guess it would be the 4th line, but where it's generating that query with the question mark.
okay.
So the prepare statement, does that clean it, basically?
No. So I think it escapes characters and wraps it in quotes as well.
Yeah.
So
It'll basically force whatever you put inside to not break your statement, and it'll all read as one string instead of having the ability to put in substrings, which is what most SQL injections kind of revolve around, or just arbitrary SQL symbols.
these are really just examples of like if you were to implement this in the code. So so this is an example of stored procedures. So what you can do is in SQL, you can actually write functions. So in this case, it's SP, so stored procedure, get account balance. And basically you just take this parameter customer name and shove it into a SQL function, which once it's down in the SQL server, it's basically wrapped and just treated as one single variable, so it can't really escape and malform your query. If you're really good at writing SQL functions, they're really, really ugly. I've written them before, they're bad. But that is one option. You can also whitelist input. So if you have a parameter coming in and you know it's supposed to be like some type, you can check it on its way in and it's like a stored procedure, or I guess this would be in a stored procedure. And if it's not a type that you expect, you can basically just break out and say no. So I don't know if that's me.
What are you doing?
I'm not touching it.
Make sure the bug's all the way in.
I think it's the projectors because the back one's still off. Anyway. Okay, here's another input validation. So if they've got someone sending in like your sort order, you can do a, what is it again? The inline.
I forgot.
Ternary operator. So basically, sort order, if it's true or false, then you can say ascending or descending. So they can't just add what they want here. It's already chosen for them. So it can only be true or false because it's a Boolean. So that'll get caught on the way in. So now, if you guys want to pull out your laptops, we can actually do a little bit of this. So this top one, yeah, I don't have a domain, so it's just AWS IPs. But that top one is Juice Shop. So basically when you go to that website, you can try to log in as a user, and there's supposed to be 4. I couldn't get the 4th one to ever work. So really there's 3. But basically log in as admin, Jim, and vendor. So have fun, I guess. It's a fun time. There's also WebGoat, which has a little bit more of like a walkthrough tutorial before they get into like real injection, if you want to do that. But that's all I really have for slides. So if anyone has any questions, just let me know. Oh, I also have the answers after this, so if you guys want, we can go over that.
Hey, so I didn't do anything, and I said you successfully solved a challenge. I did not.
You know what it's doing, Chris? What? When we deployed this for Franco's class?
Yeah.
So Juice Shop does this magical thing where
So a single install Juice Shop is meant for like one team of people to play against. So if you have like 20 people playing on the same one, it freaks out a little bit.
I guess I could put the real
It still works. If you get the challenge right, you'll know. But you might get a lot of messages all of a sudden. Here, this is stupid.
Do you want me to put the real one on there?
Show you broken blood vessels and
See, it's definitely not me.
oh, it's you on. Look at it go. So that I took a picture so I could remind myself here's a good eye. And I was coughing so hard this weekend. I put a blood vessel in my eye. It was really bad. It was like the full chest convulsions when we talked. It was very cool.
You said you couldn't get the last one to work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you supposed to like SQL inject the search bar?
We'll go over the answer, but that one, from what I remember, it's kind of hard. It'll probably take a while.
You'd have to figure out how many columns there are, and then you'd have to like format the injection right.
Uh-oh.
Slowly fading away.
Big long error message.
No, I just kind
What am I
of
getting for dinner? I have like no food and no one to go grocery shopping, so I have technically I have but I'm just taking out lunch. I have one tomorrow and one on Friday. And then I have a happy hour on Monday. They invite me to at Mellow Mushroom in Westchester. So they scheduled a meeting for us to drive, and they even gave us a paper that we need to use for the meeting. It's an offsite.
Oh, I forgot to mention WebGoat. You like actually create an account and like go in there and do stuff. The front like login page is not what you're supposed to break. Yeah, for some reason they have you make an account, but this isn't a Docker container, so it's gonna get destroyed. So don't, like, you can do user password or whatever.
Last week, no. It just was cold.
You guys working this semester all part time?
Chris is next year, JC and I are after that.
Are you cool? He's like, no, full time. Do you want to do that after the second?
After that, because
Solid.
maybe like when you
Summer camp?
you talk about semi or
I want before the
I didn't know about it.
So I've only ever seen slotted
I told Mike that I told Mike so I helped him develop a lot of my curriculum and stuff for my independent study. And Mike went and like told, okay, hey, that we're gonna run a week-long summer and go over all that stuff. And I'm like, Mike, you don't have to do that. The problem is,
It's smack dab in the middle of the summer, so like everyone here will either be in class or on co-op. So if you're on co-op, there's no way in hell, and if you're in class,
If you try to
I
find
mean, I proposed like, this is anything that we do, like,
so just don't.
if we can pull it off at all, sure. I mean, that's
What, did you get admin yet?
If you push for next year.
Really?
That's what
I got out of it, but I can't.
It started with just a day.
Yeah, because
What, the CTF thing?
the summer camp, it goes pretty in depth.
oh, I looked at the like day 4 and 5, it was like high school students are gonna be dead by the end of
The
last 2 days cut it out and ran the first one.
point of that one is to give these guys touch their toes in the water all the way down to like the lowest level shit. But you know, like I did it for an independent study. That was it. Like I got to do my independent stuff in my grade. So how's Randy doing?
Somebody does, but I did just one. So, I think it's all based on the same thing, we get confused.
Oh, okay. We're all actually.
I think the whole starting with something like that, we can work on.
Oh, that's right.
So that's under it.
Yeah, and we're all looking at the same.
I saw some videos here actually.
See that?
So like as soon as you have some functionality piece of code, like a press all in case you see why they're
Okay.
what is a lot bigger.
Do you understand what we did there?
Deployment is also very big.
Just destroy.
Website, once you turn your email.
Fucking brutal, dude.
It's gonna be it's gonna be awesome as well.
And then handing that.
Right now, it like can't do Windows in any way, shape, or form. So
You
you have to deploy Windows. That's Windows being mean Windows.
That's because Windows has like
The problem with that is that
hardware.
if you type in SQL.
How do they get around it with ESXi stuff?
Can you deploy
It
the
doesn't-
box image?
And so it runs, it's running a command, and then instead of your email being there, you're telling it to do something different.
That's true, we could make a Windows
Yeah.
interest.
Always ran with the same
Right.
processor.
So what he did,
I think the interest in
the email field, the code that's on the website, will, like an email field, and then open the parentheses.
So basically, we would just have to have like a vanilla Windows 10, and every time you deploy it, you're gonna have to start from scratch.
We would need to install like a fresh.
Could you just get a snapshot of an already deployed? Like
The way the hardware gets generated under the hood is just like a giant XML file, so like you're defining the like ABI and everything. Low
properties of your system.
Yeah.
If you change one thing, Windows is like, I can't boot because I'm hardware locked.
The Linux machines are extremely resilient though, because they're like,
Because it's looking for an email, but it gives it
Yeah, as long
empty
as it has
email,
hardware to boot.
and then tells it, look for that, or
So can Range Master theoretically could we give it just straight already
Yeah,
done
but
PBX
for
images and just that
Or
work?
we could like hand install.
are you rickrolling?
No, that was already there. The was already there. So it's good you both.
I think that'd be not the most elegant,
It's just
but
something you don't have already.
So he closed the email
Okay,
field
yeah, it's not
and
hard.
said,
What, Windows?
it like,
It'll
that
just take some
return
time.
false,
Have to
it's
hand
not really
install
doing
it.
it. But so he added an or statement that's always true.
You can just deploy it on KVM and then that is the one that you use, or we can do something
Or he
special.
has its own so then it always lets you in. So then he hit the semicolon to end that command, and then
I'm under the
and then the
impression
two
that
dashes
we
is the
changed the
comment,
processor type.
so then it ignored
Okay.
everything after that.
So
Exact
basically what we can
password.
do
I
is
successfully
have,
started the challenge login as Jim and Ben.
You get a.
Oh, so when it's
No,
no,
Yeah. No.
Have you guys gotten funding stuff, ERP stuff figured out for you?
Dashes means just, once it sees that
This
you
is-
have like
this isn't-
everything after the comment,
Yeah.
probably like a developer explanation or something, I shouldn't run that.
So I'm filling treasurer.
And it goes on to the next one.
Still getting a few things after that.
Yeah. One thing you guys can do, because we obviously competed at CTFs and won. This is legit. You guys can make a solid case. I made a case. I got it accepted. UP and AIC. Whatever the students say, you can make a solid case for AIC or for DEFCON, which you might be able to get easier, faster than UP DEFCON. In more money, in travel costs, everything covered. You might be able to get all covered. But you got number one in the CTF or Cincy Bell. You're right. CBTS number one. I mean, right now, right there. Regardless.
You don't have to tell them that, they don't know the difference.
Yeah,
They hear CTF competition, they say 3 letters.
Damn, absolutely right.
Can we stop the lecture?
I mean, we're gonna go over the answers.
No, I don't think you can pause it.
Well, you should probably
But do you want me to go over the answers, or do you want me to wait? It's just like one slide, but. Okay. So, to log in as admin, basically you have to use the email, apostrophe or 1 = 1. So, the one that was in that meme. I just assume admin is at the top of that table. So when it comes back, I think it returns all of them.
I was able to get in as Jim by doing Jim and then doing or 1 = 1 because it would make the user that name or user name. Or
That's
email
true.
Jim.
This is like straight off the answer key on their website, so.
There's definitely multiple ways to do it.
Yeah.
I just incremented the ID count, because I figured there was gonna be 3
Yeah.
users.
There we go.
Yeah, so that's the list of user credentials, which is pretty long, and I could never get it to work, so that's another one. That's a union one as well. I can actually try it. It's very ugly. Oh yeah, also, if you ever go to these slides, we've got like all the links to everything. Let's try. Yeah, so I think someone fixed this and like actually wraps that query. But all right, that's all I have. So if nobody has questions, we're done.
Answer the phone.
What?
Answer the phone.
What if that was the call to
What?
adventure?
What if that was the
No, that's kind of weird. I would pick it up.
It's happened
My math
before.
teacher always used to pick it up, say nothing, put it back, and shrug at us, and then walk away.
What if it's
Not one word.
someone watching the live stream? Controlling us.
That could be our questions hotline.
Yeah, questions hotline, call in, or it's 850.
Is there a phone number on it?
Is there?
513-556-563.
Read it.
Everybody on the live stream, call right
Should we
now.
have a questions hotline?
Yes.
Wait, let me see if it's
Like
actually
call and give a donation. Aaron,
Yes.
Say goodbye to the live stream.
Close
is that all you got?
That's all I got. So split now.
That's all we got.